My name is Rowan Ashford. I am 27 years old and I own Frost Hollow, a vast ranch that stretches across the frozen northern border of Ameria. People call me the young wealthy landowner, but most of my fortune is only land cattle wool stores and winters harsh enough to bury the careless. The storm struck without mercy. I had just turned Bran, my warhorse crossbreed, back toward the main house when the sky changed. One moment it was heavy gray. The next it was white, thick, and furious, swallowing the world. Snow lashed sideways like blades. The wind screamed so loudly it drowned every other sound. Bran snorted and stamped, ears pinned flat. He was a steady beast trained for battle and long rides, yet even he sensed the danger closing in. "Easy," I muttered, leaning low over his neck. "We're almost home." He jerked his head hard to the left. I followed his gaze and saw it, a dark shape half buried in the drift on the slope below the trail. At first I thought it was a fallen tree, or the carcass of a deer dragged out by wolves. Then something metallic glinted beneath the snow, a length of broken chain. I swung down from the saddle before I could think twice. The snow reached my knees. Each step dragged like walking through wet cement. The cold bit through my gloves and cloak, but I kept moving until I reached the shape. It was a woman, an orc woman. She lay on her side, half-covered wrists raw from recent ropes. A short length of chain still trailed from one iron cuff. Her heavy cloak was torn to rags. The simple dress beneath clung wet and dark against her gray-green skin. Snow had settled in her black hair, turning the strands stiff and white. Her lips were blue. I dropped to one knee and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was there, weak but steady. "Can you hear me?" I asked. Her cracked lips parted. The voice that came out was barely more than breath, yet I caught every word against the howling wind. "Don't let them find me." I stripped off my own cloak and wrapped it around her. When I lifted her, I was surprised by how light she felt, too light for someone her height. She did not fight. She only curled tighter against my chest, chasing whatever warmth she could find. As I carried her back to Bran, her head lolled against my shoulder. Her eyes opened a slit. They were pale gray, clouded like frost on glass. She was blind. The realization hit me hard, but I had no time to dwell on it. I mounted behind her, one arm locked around her waist, and turned Bran toward home. The horse plunged forward through the whiteout. Snow stung my face like needles. I bent low, shielding her body with mine. "Stay awake," I said close to her ear. "If you sleep now, you might not wake again. Listen to my voice. We're almost there." She gave no answer, but her breathing stayed shallow and quick against my chest. I kept talking the whole way. About the fire waiting in the great hall. About the hot wine Marta would force on us. About how my housekeeper would scold me for riding into a storm like a fool. Anything to keep her conscious. The words blurred together, but they worked. Her body stayed tense against mine. When the stone walls of Frost Hollow finally rose out of the blizzard, she exhaled once very softly. "Home," she whispered, as if the word itself hurt. I kicked the great hall door open with my boot. "Marta," I shouted. My housekeeper came running from the kitchen, followed by Joran, the stable master, his scarred jaw set tight. Marta's eyes widened at the sight of the woman in my arms. "By the gods, Rowan, what have you dragged in this time?" "Not a what. A who." I carried the orc woman straight to the hearth and laid her on the long bench closest to the flames. Warm water, dry blankets. "Hurry." Marta took one look at the raw marks on her wrists, the bruises along her arms, and the clouded eyes, then snapped orders at Joran without wasting breath on questions. He ran for hot coals and salve. We stripped away the frozen rags. Fresh bruises bloomed across her ribs and thighs. Someone had beaten her badly before leaving her to die. Anger rose in my throat, cold and sharp. When Marta pressed a cup of honeyed water to the woman's lips, she managed a few slow sips. Her fingers trembled as she tried to hold the cup herself but could not find it. Marta guided her hand. "You're at Frost Hollow," I said. "My name is Rowan Ashford." She turned her face toward my voice with eerie accuracy, even though her eyes remained blank. "A landowner?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Call it what you like. In these parts the land is mine, the herds are mine, and now the trouble outside my gate is probably mine too if I keep you here." A faint twitch touched the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, just the ghost of one. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated a long moment. "Mira." I repeated it quietly, committing the sound to memory. Something in the pause before she spoke told me the name mattered more than she let on. Mira, I said. You'll stay the night. No one is taking you anywhere. You don't know who I am, she murmured. I know that if I'd left you out there another half hour, they'd have found you frozen solid by morning. That's enough for now. Marta gave me a rare look of approval as she tucked fresh blankets around Mira. I knelt and picked up the broken piece of chain I had cut from her wrist. The iron bore a small stamped mark, the seal of the Carrick slavers. I knew that mark too well. They did not trade in wool or horses or salt. They traded in lives. Outside, the wind screamed against the windows like something hungry. I looked at the orc woman lying by my fire, pale and battered and blind, and felt the weight of what I had just carried home. I had not simply rescued a stranger from the snow. I had invited an entire storm inside my walls. The storm had not fully died by morning, but the sky had lightened enough to let the world breathe again. I rose before dawn, the habit of a rancher who knew every minute counted. As I descended the stairs, the soft clink of a wooden spoon against the rim of a pot drew me toward the kitchen. Mira stood by the hearth. She still wore the thick wool shawl Marta had given her. Her black hair was now dry and tied back neatly. One hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. The other moved the spoon in slow, careful circles inside the pot of porridge. She was trying to stir without spilling a drop. You should still be resting, I said. She stopped instantly. I'm not used to lying still for long. You nearly died last night. But this morning I haven't. Her answer was so matter-of-fact that a quiet laugh escaped me. Marta was slicing bread at the counter on the other side of the kitchen. She shook her head. This girl has a mouth harder than the chains they put on her. Mira tilted her head toward the sound of Marta's voice and spoke with careful politeness. I thank you for last night. Marta raised an eyebrow. Good. Now thank the master of the house, too. Mira turned her face precisely toward my voice. I thank you, Master Ashford. Rowan is fine. I do not call wealthy landowners by their first name without permission. As you wish. But I'm only 27, so don't make me sound like I need a cane. Again that faint twitch at the corner of her mouth appeared and vanished. I sat down at the table across from her. She found the chair with careful fingers, lowered herself slowly, as someone who had learned to map the world by touch and memory. Even blind, she never groped in panic. She simply moved one beat slower, and then found what she needed. It fascinated me. Has it been this way since childhood, I asked. The blindness. Yes. My mother taught me to live as if I had no eyes from the time I was very small. Your mother was wise. No, she replied softly. She was afraid. I did not press further, but her words stayed with me. After breakfast, I led Mira on a short walk through the great hall so she could memorize the layout. She counted steps quickly. 5 from the long bench to the hearth, 8.5 to the staircase, 3 to the large window. She never missed once. Why did the Carrick slavers take you, I asked when we stopped near the window. Mira remained silent. Outside, snow tapped against the glass in soft bursts. I need to know, I said. If they come back, I have to know who I'm sheltering under my roof. She tightened her fingers on the back of the chair. I was traveling with a small party over Black Ridge Pass, she said. Not merchants. Just hired escorts. Yours no. She hesitated. I only needed to reach the south. And then, the Carrick men ambushed us in the pass. They killed 2 bound the rest. Because I was blind, they thought me useless and kept me only to sell cheap to the mines or the pleasure houses. I escaped once. And they caught you again. Yes. I leaned against the windowsill, staring out at the white expanse. And the part about being left in the storm, the sled broke an axle. Wolves were following. They lightened the load. Her voice was flat, almost empty. I was part of the load they discarded. I turned to look at her. She sat perfectly straight-faced toward my voice. No tears, no trembling, no plea for pity. People in tragic tales usually wept. Those who had truly lived through hell spoke in dry tones. I said slowly, At Frost Hollow you are not cargo. Mira did not reply. Only when I turned away did I hear her ask very quietly, Then what am I? The question stopped me cold. You are someone I saved. I answered. What comes after that we'll figure out later. By afternoon, the storm had lessened further, and that was exactly when the first real trouble arrived at my door. Sir Cedric Moen, the regional tax collector, rode up with 2 gray-cloaked guards. I had barely stepped onto the porch when I saw him frowning at the hoofprints and sled marks still visible outside the gate. Master Rowan Cedric said in a voice sweet as overripe honey, I hear you brought an orc woman home last night. News travels fast in these parts. Cedric smiled falsely. The Carrick Guild has posted a reward for a runaway female prisoner. They describe her as blind. I leaned against the porch post. Is that so? Harboring stolen property? Property. I cut him off. You call a living person property on my doorstep? Cedric faltered, then changed tone. I'm only speaking in the current legal language of the Borderlands. Then the legal language of the Borderlands should learn to speak like human beings. His eyes narrowed. Rowan, don't turn a small matter into a big one. Hand her over, collect the reward, and everything stays peaceful. Since when do you care about the peace of House Ashford? He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. I warned you. The Carricks don't like losing merchandise. I stepped down one stair enough that the 2 guards instinctively placed hands on their sword hilts. And I don't like strangers standing at my gate telling me how to run my house. Cedric smirked. You're young, Rowan. Young men do foolish things out of pity. Better than doing dirty things for coin. I turned my back and walked inside without waiting for his reply. As the great hall door closed behind me, I saw Mira standing at the foot of the stairs. Has he gone? She asked. You heard everything. The wind carried his voice inside. I looked at her for several seconds. You should be afraid. I have been afraid long enough. I moved closer. If the Carricks return, do you want to leave before they cause more trouble? She gripped the stair rail tightly. Yes, the word hit me harder than I expected. But she added, I have nowhere else to go. I let out a slow breath. Then stay. Let them come. They will have to go through me first. Mira stood very still for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the wind outside the door. No one has ever said that to me before. That night before I went to bed, I ordered Joran to double the guards at the gate, lock the south storehouse, and bring the hunting dogs out to the front yard. And for the first time in years, I placed my sword right beside my bed. 3 days later, the sky finally cleared. Frost Hollow lay under a cold, brilliant light. Snow blanketed the fields, the fences, the stable roofs, and the tall pines that stood like spears along the hills. Children from the herding families shouted as they shoveled paths through the drifts. The hearth fires burned steadily day and night. And in the middle of that quiet rhythm, Mira began to slip into the life of the ranch as though she had always belonged. What surprised me most was that she refused to act like someone who needed to be waited on. She memorized the position of every object in the kitchen after a single morning. She could tell which grain sacks had grown damp by their scent alone. She recognized the footsteps of Marta Joran young Tubb from the stables and mine from the far end of the hallway long before anyone spoke. One afternoon I walked into the western stable and found her standing between 2 nervous yearlings. The black colt was tossing its head and striking the floor with a hoof that had already kicked more than one man. Don't come closer, Joran whispered beside me. That one bites. But Mira stepped forward anyway. She did not reach out at once. She simply stood still, head tilted, listening to the colt's ragged breathing. Then she lifted her hand slowly. A few heartbeats later, the animal lowered its head and let her run her fingers down the length of its nose. Joran stared open-mouthed. Devils take me. Watch your tongue around a lady, Marta snapped from the doorway. I watched Mira. How did you do that? An animal that is afraid is no different from a person who is afraid, she answered. It smells your worry before you ever open your mouth. Then you must smell plenty of worry on me. No. She turned her face toward my voice. What I smell on you is mostly anger. I gave a short laugh. That same evening, I found her sitting near the great hearth, fingertips tracing the edges of a small silver emblem Marta had taken from the torn lining of her old cloak. The piece was delicate, too delicate for borderland work. A stylized black crown above 2 crossed fangs. What is that? I asked. Her fingers closed instantly. Nothing. Hiding things in my own hall is a poor habit. She opened her hand again with obvious reluctance. The silver lay in her palm, catching the firelight. It belonged to my mother. From a large clan. Yes. How large? Mira stayed silent. I rested my arms on the back of the chair opposite her and leaned closer. I am not asking so I can sell you, Mira. I know. Then why won't you trust me? She lifted her face. Those clouded gray eyes pointed straight at the sound of my voice. Because if you knew everything, you would be dragged into a war that is not yours. I looked at the silver emblem again. Maybe I was dragged in the moment I carried you home through the blizzard. She did not argue. 2 days after that, the Carrick men came in force. 4 riders on black horses carrying a sealed warrant from the regional lord. Their leader was Garin Pite, tall, broad, with a beard like wire and eyes like dirty pebbles. I stood at the main gate in my heavy cloak sword at my hip. Behind me, Jorn and 3 armed hands held long spears. We were not an army, but we were enough to show that Frost Hollow did not open for anyone. Garin lifted the warrant. We are here to reclaim lost property of the Carrick Guild. Nail it to the stable wall, I said. My horses might enjoy reading it. His face hardened. Master Ashford, do not make this ugly. The blind orc was purchased legally. With the blood of the men you killed at Black Ridge. Garin narrowed his eyes. You know more than you should. Not enough to hang you yet. Pity. His gaze slid past my shoulder toward the great hall. I hear she is still young. Blind lowers the price, but some men like rare things. Joran cursed. I raised a hand to stop him. Say one more word about her, I told Garin, and I will shove that paper down your throat. He actually smiled. You think you can keep her forever? This is the border. The law here favors the man with the deed, not the man with a conscience. Then today the law can try leaning the other way. The air between us froze. A low wind spun snow around the horse's legs. Then from behind me, Mira's voice rang out clear and steady. Garin Pike. I spun around. She stood on the stone steps wearing the dark green cloak Marta had given her, hands resting on the railing. Though her eyes remained clouded, she held herself so straight that the entire yard seemed to fall silent. Garin gave a mocking laugh. So the blind merchandise still remembers my name. I remember the voice of the man who broke a child's arm for dropping a key. The smirk vanished from his face. I glanced at her. She had never told me that story. Garin spat on the ground. Playing the hero now, little blind, Miss Mira lifted her chin. No, I only want you to remember that if you step through this gate, you will die. The threat should have sounded ridiculous coming from a blind woman, but the calm certainty in her tone made the horses on Garin's side shift uneasily. I drew my sword a hand's breadth from the scabbard. The steel flashed once. You heard her, I said. Leave. Garin looked at me, then at Mira, then jerked his reins. As they galloped away, he shouted over his shoulder. We will return with the Lord's law. You won't be laughing then, Ashford. The riders vanished in a spray of muddy snow. I sheathed my blade and walked up the steps to Mira. You should not have come outside. I did not want you standing alone. You were 20 paces away and blind. I know the way Garin's voice trembles when he is afraid. I stopped in front of her. You just made yourself a larger target. I was already a target. I wanted to be angry. But when I saw the faint green bruises still circling her wrists where the chains had been, the anger died before it could rise. That night before sleep, I placed the silver emblem on the table between us. I asked an old trader, I said, that symbol does not belong to any border clan. It is the mark of the royal house of the orcs in the northeast. Mira stood motionless. I looked straight into her face. Who are you? A long silence stretched. I am someone the Carricks must never capture, she answered. That is not a name, but it is the most important truth. I clenched my jaw. Part of me hated secrets. My mother had died because of secrets in my father's old court. My father had died in an ambush because he trusted the wrong keeper of secrets. I had built Frost Hollow on the belief that here everything must be plain, the price of wool, the count of cattle, promises, debts, loyalty. Yet the woman standing before me was a mist I could not grasp. Before I could ask again, the sharp snap of a crossbow string sounded from the yard. Down, Mira cried. I reacted on instinct, pulling her to the floor. A bolt tore through the window glass and buried itself in the wooden pillar exactly where my head had been a heartbeat earlier. Shouts rose outside. Joran and the hands were already moving. I seized my sword and ran for the door. In the purple twilight, a gray-cloaked figure was spurring a horse over the low stone wall. Jorn's spear missed. I snatched a crossbow from the wall rack, aimed at the moving shadow, and fired. My bolt struck the rider's shoulder. He swayed, but did not fall. They were not finished. When I turned back inside, Mira was still on the floor, both hands gripping the edge of her cloak. You heard the string. Yes. Before I did, I heard the leather creak when the man drew it taut. I stood staring at her. For the first time, a strange thought took shape in my mind. Mira might be blind, but she had never been weak. The decree came at noon, carried by a single rider under the Baron's colors. I stood in the great hall and read the sealed parchment twice. The words were written in the polished language of nobles, who like to keep their hands clean. Any non-human without recognized blood protection or deed of freedom on the border could be seized, detained, or returned to the lawful claimant. A single signature from Garin Pike would be enough. I folded the paper slowly, feeling the wax crack under my thumb. Marta watched me from the doorway. They're not playing anymore. No, I said. They're making the law do their dirty work. I knew what the document really meant. If I kept Mira here as a guest or servant, they could take her by force and call it justice. There was only one shield. The law of the border still respected a lawful wife. That evening, I found her alone by the hearth. The fire painted soft gold across her gray-green skin. She sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, as if she already sensed the weight of what I was about to say. I pulled a chair close and sat facing her. Mira. She turned her face toward me with that eerie precision. Rowan. I had rehearsed a dozen softer ways to begin. None of them felt right. So I spoke the truth plain. The Baron sent a decree today. It gives the Carricks legal right to claim you unless you are under the protection of a recognized house. The only way I can give you that protection is to make you my wife. She did not move. The only sound was the crackle of the logs. I'm not asking because I fell in love the moment I pulled you from the snow, I continued. I'm not that kind of fool. But these past days, the house feels different with you in it. The stables are quieter. The children follow you, asking questions. Marta sewed you 2 new dresses when she has never sewn extra for anyone. And I stopped searching for the right words. I hear your footsteps in the hall and I realize I've started waiting for them. Mira's fingers tightened on the edge of her shawl until the knuckles showed pale green. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough. You saved my life with that crossbow warning. You're blind, but you hear the wind better than any scout I've ever met. You hate pity. You never take what isn't offered. And you haven't lied about wanting to stay. I leaned forward until our knees nearly touched. That is enough for me to stand in front of the gods and call you my wife. If saving you is what makes me say it sooner than I should, then I accept that. She was quiet for so long I could hear my own heartbeat. If one day you discover I have hidden very large things from you, she asked, voice trembling only at the edges, then I will be furious later. I managed a small, tired smile. Right now, I'm asking, will you have me? Mira drew a slow breath. She rose, took one careful step, then another, until she stood so close I could smell the faint scent of pine soap Marta had used on her hair. Her clouded eyes were aimed straight at my face. I do not know how to be the wife of a human landowner, and I have never been husband to an orc princess who can throw an oil lamp better than most archers. The words slipped out before I could stop them. We both froze. A tiny, broken sound, half laugh, half surrender escaped her. Then very slowly she nodded. I will. I do not remember who moved first, only that my hand rose and my palm brushed her cheek, and she did not pull away. The first kiss was not rushed. It was warm, deliberate, and terrifying in the way only something real can be. We set the wedding for the day after tomorrow. Simple, private. No banners, no feast, just the small stone chapel at the eastern edge of the ranch. That night the trouble came early. I woke to the frantic clang of the alarm bell and the mad barking of the dogs. Flames painted the southern sky orange. The hay barn. I was on my feet and halfway down the stairs when Mira appeared in the hallway, already wrapped in her cloak, a short knife hidden in her sleeve. 3 men at the south yard, she said. 1 at the kitchen door. How do you? I smelled the pine tar they used to start the fire before the flames even rose. I grabbed her wrist. Stay inside. No. Mira, if they take me, everything you have done becomes worthless. I cursed under my breath and pressed my second dagger into her hand. Stay behind Marta. If anyone breaks the back door, you strike first and scream after. Outside the barn burned with a roar. Joran and the hands were hauling water. I ran for the south gate just as a shadow lunged from behind the tool shed. My sword rang against his short axe. A second man fired a crossbow. The bolt buried itself in the snow at my feet. The third tried to scale the stone wall. Then from the second floor window, a glass oil lamp sailed through the air and shattered exactly where the attackers stood. Flames exploded across the snow, catching their cloaks and the oil they had spilled. Horses screamed and reared. Garen, I recognized his black leather coat, roared in fury. I glanced up. Mira stood at the open window. Blind or not, she had thrown true. When I looked back, Garen understood the fight was lost. He bellowed retreat, and the three of them fled into the darkness on lathered horses. One hand was wounded in the shoulder. Half the south barn was gone, but Mira was safe. I walked back into the great hall. She waited at the foot of the stairs, fingers white on the railing. You threw true, I said, keeping my voice steady. I heard the oil hit the ground where they stood. I looked at her a long moment. Tomorrow, I told her, we marry. The wedding took place the next day at noon in the small stone chapel at the eastern edge of Frost Hollow. I wore the black coat with silver trim of House Ashford. Mira wore the deep green velvet dress Marta had stayed up all night altering from my mother's old gown. Marta had chosen green deliberately. She said Mira was not a woman to be forced into white like other brides. Snow had stopped falling. The light outside was cold and clean, sharp as polished steel. Only a handful of us stood inside the chapel, Marta, Joran, old Father Oswin, and the most trusted hands. No music, no banners, no feast waiting outside. Yet when Mira placed her hand in mine, the entire world seemed to grow quiet. Father Oswin cleared his throat. Do you, Rowan Ashford, take this woman to be your lawful wife? I do. Mira, do you take Rowan Ashford to be your lawful husband? She lifted her face toward his, voice steady and clear. I do. When the silver ring of House Ashford slid onto her finger, something tightened in my throat. I had never been a sentimental man, but watching the woman I had pulled from the blizzard stand beside me as if she had always belonged here, I understood there was no turning back. Father Oswin declared us husband and wife. Marta wept openly. Joran turned away as if dust had blown into his eyes. I bent and pressed a kiss to Mira's forehead. She whispered soft enough for only me to hear. Thank you, Rowan. You're not allowed to call me master anymore. I will consider it. This time she truly smiled. It was the most peaceful moment I had known all winter. It lasted exactly 1 hour. The sound of war horns rolled down from the eastern ridge while we were still seated at the modest table in the great hall. At first I thought Garen had returned with more men, but when I stepped onto the porch, every soul at Frost Hollow fell silent. A column of orc riders in black armor was descending the slope. Not raiders, not clan warriors. Royal Guard, 7 black banners bearing the silver crown and crossed fangs snapped in the wind. Between them rolled a heavy war carriage drawn by 4 massive beasts with silver manes. Marta gripped my arm. Rowan, I see them. The riders halted at the gate without a word. A tall woman stepped down from the carriage. She stood taller than most human men, wrapped in a black fur cloak that brushed the snow. A crown of dark iron circled her silver-streaked hair. Her eyes were cold enough to freeze the air another degree. I did not need an introduction. She was the Orc Queen. She walked straight through the gate as though the entire ranch had always been hers. The guards parted. I descended the steps on instinct and stopped in front of the hall door. This is Ashford land, I said. Your Majesty arrives without warning. Her gaze passed over me and settled on the doorway behind. Good, she answered, voice low and commanding. I dislike waiting. Then she raised her voice. Kiara, come forth. Behind me, Mira's entire body went rigid. That was not her name. I turned. She stood on the threshold, hands clenched in the folds of her wedding dress. Her face had gone pale green. Mother Marta breathed. The queen took another step. Enough, she said. You may drop the blind act now. No one moved. I heard my own blood pounding in my ears. Mira, no Kaera, stood motionless for several heartbeats. Then very slowly, she raised her head. And for the first time since I had carried her out of the storm, her eyes met mine. They were not clouded. They were sharp steel gray, alive and piercing. Shock, anger, and a strange, hollow feeling collided inside my chest. Every memory of the past weeks rushed back the way she always stopped at the exact right spot, the oil lamp thrown with deadly accuracy, the way her face turned unerringly toward every voice. It had all been a lie. Kaera stepped down 2 stairs, looking at me with the face of someone who feared she had just lost everything. Rowan! Her voice cracked. I can explain. I gave a dry, humorless laugh. I believe you can. The queen stopped at the foot of the steps and regarded us both as though weighing a blade. She is Princess Kaera Vorga, my only daughter, the queen said. Since she was 5, I forced her to pretend blindness so the rival factions at court would not see her as a threat worth assassinating. A blind child is harmless. A sighted heir is not. Kaera did not deny it. The slavers never knew her true rank, I asked. They only knew they had captured an orc noble with an escort, the queen replied. Had they realized who she was, they would never have abandoned her in the blizzard. They would have torn this kingdom apart for ransom. Kaera took one more step toward me. I didn't tell you because if you knew, you would have sent me away at once. Or worse, you would have been dragged into my war. I was dragged in anyway, I said, a long time ago. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I'm sorry. I wanted to say a simple apology was not enough. I wanted to ask how many of the moments between us had been real. I wanted to demand why even her name had been a secret. But I also saw the raw fear in her face, and it was more honest than anything else. The queen glanced at the silver ring on her daughter's finger. You married him. Yes, Kaera answered, spine straight. I chose him freely. The yard was deathly quiet. The queen studied me properly for the first time, as if I were a man instead of an obstacle. You saved my daughter's life. You gave her shelter. Then you married her. Yes. Do you understand what that means? Rowan Ashford. I imagine it means trouble on a scale I have never seen. She watched me a moment longer. Then, against all expectation, the queen gave a single nod. It could mean war. It could also mean an alliance. She turned to Kaera. You must return to Blackforge with me, Kaera answered without hesitation. If I return, my husband comes with me. Marta drew a sharp breath. Joran swore under his breath. I looked at Kaera. She was waiting for my answer, more tense than she had been when Garen aimed a crossbow at my head. I tightened my grip on the hilt of my sword, then met the queen's eyes. Your Majesty, I said. I already picked up the greatest trouble of my life in the middle of a blizzard. I walked down and stopped beside Kaera. I'm not about to abandon it on the road now. For the first time since the riders appeared, Kaera smiled, small but bright enough to cut through the winter light. Far in the distance, dark clouds were gathering again over the eastern mountains. The road to Blackforge lay open, and I knew with perfect clarity that the story between me and the orc woman, who had never truly been blind, had only just begun.